All right, let's start. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's lecture of our lecture series, Global Narratives of Disinformation, Focus on Russia, whereas our focus today is not only on Russia, but on Belarus as well. And my name is Nanina Graf. I am a lecturer and doctoral candidate at Slavic Institute of the University of Zurich. I am mainly focusing on issues related to political prisoners and repression in Belarus. And today it's truly an honor to welcome our guest, Yuliana Shemetovets, I'm so sorry, from the Belarusian cyber partisans. Before we begin, I would like to make a few technical notes. Today's discussion will be entirely in English, and if you'd prefer to listen to the talk in Russian, just click on the globe icon on the bottom of the screen and switch to your preferred language. Please feel free as well to submit all your questions and comments in the Q&A section, and we'll address them later on in the session. Sorry, so much about the technical notes, but what brings us here today? In the session, we'll explore the, well, let's say like that fascinating and courageous work of the Belarusian cyber partisans, which is a highly organized group of hacktivists who are challenging authoritarian narratives in Belarus. Since their formation, I think that was in September 2020, the cyber partisans have led a digital resistance movement, conducting cyber attacks and information campaigns against the Belarusian regime and against its agencies, and more recently, actually, against Russian military forces operating in Belarus. Our goal today is to understand this, well, wide-ranging strategies the cyber partisans use to resist authoritarianism, and through these efforts, they're showing us how critical and actually important technology can be in supporting democratic movements. With this said, I would like to introduce our today's guest, Yuliana Shemetovets. Shemetovets, sorry.
No worries.
She's joining us from New York City today, where she works as an activist and official representative for the Belarusian cyber partisans. And she's actually the official spokesperson of the cyber partisans as well. And if I'm not mistaken, you're the only one that's face is known, right?
Yes,
Right.
that's correct.
And in her professional role, she works as a cloud-based application specialist, and she's mostly concentrating on cybersecurity issues. In her spare time, so when she's not working, Yuliana serves as the director of the Belarus Liberty nonprofit organization, and she manages projects and engages in platform building, database coordination, and so on. She's dedicated actually to leveraging technology to empower civil society, and she's of course advocating for human rights as well. With this said, or actually I cannot forget you're highly accomplished academically as well. You're holding a Master of Arts in Political Science and a Master of Science in Data Analysis from Harrisburg University and the other one from Rutgers University. With this said, I welcome you, Yuliana. It is a pleasure to have you here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nanina, for this introduction, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm happy to share the work of the group I represent and the work of the group that I'm a member of as well. So I'm Belarusian. I grew up in Belarus, and because of the situation there, I had to move. One of the reasons why I moved to New York. Though I was when I moved, and I'm still active about trying to bring a change in Belarus. Before I describe the work of cyber partisans and how the group is challenging authoritarian narratives, I would like to tell you briefly about the situation in Belarus in general. I know that we are more focused today on Russia and how, or in general, I guess your campaign is a series of lectures focusing on Russia, but Of course, this country influences Belarus as much as it influences, and now not only influences, but launched a war against Ukraine. So Belarus is one of the countries of the Soviet Union, and it became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991. So after that, Lukashenko, who is still a president, was elected as the first president in 1994. In 1996, he changed the constitution. So since that time, it was allowed for him, I mean, anyone, but actually him to go for presidential elections numerous times. It wasn't limited. And since that time, pretty much none of the elections were recognized as fair by Western countries. You might have heard about the protests in 2020. This is the biggest protest in Belarus, and it was widely covered by Western media. But even before 2020, Belarus had protests, and Belarusians participated and showed their voice against the authoritarian dictator Lukashenko. Largest protests occurred, as you can see on the screen, in years starting of 1996. But the turning point was actually 2017. In that year, the apolitical people also joined the movement against Lukashenko. It's when he presented the tax on unemployment. It's the reminiscent of the Soviet Union practices. And that's when regular people went out to the streets and demanded to remove this tax. I think also in that year, that's when the people realized how the state lives in this Soviet Union era. Lukashenko knowingly, cherishes Soviet Union. He once dreamed to become a president of the post-Soviet Union, kind of new model of the Soviet Union. But after it got collapsed, we had a coalition of all of these countries. So he was dreaming to be the head of it, or play an important role. Obviously, it didn't happen, but this type of practices, the notion, the culture of it still is very visible in his actions and in his beliefs. But obviously, people are developing, especially after the Soviet Union. Belarus has always been a part of Europe. And quick interesting fact, actually more people died throughout the history of fighting Russia than even in the Second World War, and Belarus was one of the most affected nations after the Jewish population in the Second World War. So Belarus been a part of Europe for a long time, and it is very close. So it's easy to travel to Poland, to Lithuania, to neighboring countries, unlike, for example, Russia and some other countries of the Soviet Union. So in that sense, people are developing, people demanding, new economic practices. They want to participate in democratic elections. They want to realize, we can elect, we can actually influence the policies. And that's something that the very stable, as Lukashenko calls the state, the regime, was not ready for. And of course, it definitely showed in 2020. It's been one of the most massive elections, massive protest against the rigged elections. At some point, around 500,000 of people went out to the streets, and maybe it doesn't sound as much, especially for those, when I tell these numbers in America, it might not sound as much because, America obviously has a big population. The same goes to the European Union. But for Belarus, it's 5% of the whole population. It's a big number if you especially compare it to any other protest happening in the history of Europe or Western countries in general. And this protest didn't happen just in one day. The people would go out every Sunday, every day in different type of groups. Some day, for example, we had elderly people going out in protest. Some days there were just women protests, and it was going on in big numbers in August, September, and November even of 2020. Of course, all of these protests faced unprecedented brutality and repressions, and it hasn't stopped now. I know that Belarus is not anymore on top of the news medias, newspapers, or television programs, of course, and it's fair that Ukraine, if we're talking about Europe, took over, but the repressions continue. In 2020, there were around 5,000 criminal cases that were initiated for political reasons. The number is now much, much higher because the repressions continue. The same goes for the number of those who were detained. In 2020, it was around 35,000. Now, I believe that this number is the most updated one. It's around 100,000 of people that been detained. Around 7,000 people are still detained for political reasons. Many people lost their jobs. Thousands of people had to move. It's crazy if you think about the numbers of how many people left and how much of this brain damage occurred in Belarus. And people were even killed by the Belarusian police forces during the elections and after the imprisonment. Of course, you've heard a lot about Alexei Navalny, and what happened to him is for sure a tragedy. But for us, for our political prisoners, the number is even worse. We have around 10 people that died in prisons. We haven't heard about any of the candidates or bright and important figures in the election of 2020, such as Maria Kolesnikova. We haven't heard from them for a year, so we don't even know if they are alive. And this is kind of the difference of the level of repressions in Russia and in Belarus. In Belarus, just by the statistics, it's much worse. And of course, people went through horrible incidents in prisons or while being detained. It's been documented, and we also, as a group, work with different entities, including Helsinki Committee or Amnesty International, that now still work on describing all the cases and trying to start the cases about inhuman conditions and the way people were detained and still being detained. Of course, after these elections, the media outlets and all independent NGOs were liquidated. Many journalists were imprisoned, and you probably heard about the case of Roman Protasevich, who was also detained while flying from Greece to Vilnius. His plane was hijacked, Ryanair plane, and then he was detained after the plane was hijacked. So this is basically the brief overview of what was happening in Belarus in 2020, what is still happening, because as I said before, the repression hasn't stopped. It's still going on. It's still very active. Lukashenko hasn't forgotten or hasn't forgiven the people who went out. He's still afraid. Actually, the new elections are coming up in 2025, and they continue the harsh repressions because they're still afraid, even after what people went through, that there will be some that can go out and be much more active than they were in 2020. So this wheel of repressions, of brutality continues in Belarus even now. So in 2020, that was the picture kind of, and the inspiration for the group for cyber partisans to emerge. Belarus is historically famous for its IT specialists. So for me and for many others, it was not very surprising that the IT specialists decided on this wave of protests to also show their actions. The group was formed in September of 2020. So as you can imagine, it's in the midst of the most active phase of protests. And the founder of the group posted, he hacked the state commerce website, and he posted there a message asking other IT specialists to join him in these type of actions. And he posted some encrypted code, those who decrypted it sent a message over email, and that's how they all contacted each other and started to discuss, what can be done. And they were not professional hackers. So that's something that was also very interesting because they didn't know as much what to do. Of course, there were like pen testers, the official hackers that work for the companies in order to see the vulnerabilities, to find the vulnerabilities and weak points of entrance to the external and internal networks, but they were not professional hackers. They, verified each other in some way, and that's how the movement started and the group started. There were just around 5 people. Originally, it was even 3. Then the core was around 5 people, and now there are around 80 people in the group. Of course, it doesn't mean that 80 people, know the sensitive information or the work closely with like hacking, because we have different areas of work, which I will describe a little later. But the group definitely grew. I would say that the core number of people, the number of people of like the core group is around 30 right now. But let's talk about the beginning. So here in the screen, you can see how the first actions appeared from the group. The first hacks were very symbolic, more in a symbolic way rather than like high-level complex operations that we can see later on as the group was developing. So one of the first actions, they hacked the Belarusian live TV channels that they translate on YouTube, and they changed the news coverage or whatever programs that these channels had to the videos of what was happening on the streets during the protests of 2020, how people were beating up, how police force was brutal to people, and like in general, what's going on. That was, I would believe to say that the first way of realizing, how you can try to challenge this the narratives of the regime showing one picture of what's happening, and the cyber partisans try to disrupt it and show what's actually happening. So, and in that way, trying to reach the audience that would not know or previously especially would not participate in any type of protest. Because what very critical what happened in 2020 is that the neutral people, this type of audience that, say usually, I don't care as long as there is no war, yes, the Lukashenko is dictator, yes, we don't like him, but, I don't want to be political. I just want to live my life peacefully, work, raise kids and things like that. That year, these people woke up because they saw the brutality, they saw the repressions. For that reason, it was important to even spread this message more, so they actually see and they could join the movement that we had in 2020. And here in this in the bottom part of the screen, you can see how the news media also started to cover the work of cyber partisans. Not at the very beginning, I would say, but when the more prominent hacks happened. And I will switch to and talk more about what the areas of resistance for the group are. So the major focus and what basically made the group so popular and so well known, especially in a specific hacktivist world, is that the group is conducting hacking attacks on Belarusian and Russian regimes. It started, of course, with just Belarus. We are Belarusians. The group consists of, I would say, around 90% of Belarusians. There are some other, people that joined and have important work inside the group, but the majority are all Belarusians. Though, as obviously when even in the beginning, like I wanted to switch to this notion that after the beginning of the Russian full-scale war, our shift switched to our movement switched also to the Russian regime. But even before that, when the protests were happening, it was clear for the group members that Russia has an influence. Russia supports Lukashenko. It does help him to stay in power. And without the Russian support, there are just much more chances for us to change the situation in Belarus, even before the full-scale war, because we knew what happened in 2014. We knew what happened to Georgia. We know how much money Putin gives to Lukashenko. He might not love the man, but he still supports because he needs Belarus under his influence from a militarist perspective, from a political perspective. And that's something we were openly discussing even before the full-scale war. We didn't try to attack Russian regime at that point, but it's something that we openly were discussing. And just a quick note, when I say we are attacking, of course, I don't mean that I personally hack something or someone. I don't do any type of work in that regard. It's just that I'm a member of the group, and it's just a natural thing to say we, but don't take it as if I'm sitting and hacking. I don't do this type of job. The second area of the work of cyber partisans is also an important one, and sometimes it gets a little bit overlooked, but that's also something that we focus on a lot, and that's what some of its members are working constantly only on this part of the work, and for that reason, when I say, the Belarusian cyber partisans, it doesn't mean that all of the members are hackers and self-taught hackers, which is very interesting because when I ask, how did you guys even learn? And the answer would be, watching YouTube videos, learning from, whatever's available on the internet, and just being very, very stubborn and practicing when they, try to cover as much as possible in Belarus, especially during the most active phases of the protests in 2020 and then 2021. But other members also, other groups and teams that work on other type of work are also definitely very important. And it includes those who work on creating secure communication for civil societies. The group created more than 100 of Telegram bots. Telegram is a very important application in Eastern Europe through which you not only translate the news, but you also stay in contact with people. There are special chat bots where people can write and can write safely. And in that sense, stay in touch with those who left. If they can share the news, what's happening, they can just, stay still and feel like they're part of the movement. Because, of course, there is no way to change the situation if you're not in touch with those who still stayed inside Belarus. So for that reason, we do pro bono assistance to hundreds, more than 100 at least, like civil society groups, and in general opposition political groups, and helping them with this technical assistance of them trying to stay in touch with those who stayed in Belarus. We also do create a lot of materials on how to safely use the internet and spread them through different platforms. We obviously collaborate a lot with journalists. We have our own Telegram channel, we have our website. So whatever is for people the safest way to check these materials, that's how they do it. I don't know, like how you would assess this technical part. Of course, you're students, university. I feel like that it's more, means that people are more tech savvy. But on average, what we realized, many people just are not tech savvy, and even if there is a chance that they're going to get detained, they still don't want to go and learn about VPN, about how to use the internet safely, about how to remove your personal information. And that's a very, very big chunk of work to go out there, to repeat the same things over and over again. So people take the safety in the internet really, really seriously. And we encourage, younger audience to go and set up VPN on your granny's phone or computer, because it's insanely important if you especially want to stay in touch. and see what's going on in the world, see what's going on in Belarus, see what's going on in Ukraine. And of course, all of it means that we work with a lot of media and other different important outlets in order to spread the word and be more successful in what we're doing. So let's talk a little about the hacktivism part of the work of the Cyber Partisans doing, because it definitely connects with how we do our outreach and what type of narratives we're using and how we challenge with those narratives, both Belarusian and now Russian regime. So what made Cyber Partisans most famous, as I already mentioned, obviously it's a hacktivist work, but what hacks, what was the crucial point? And I would say the crucial point was when the Belarusian Cyber Partisans hacked the Interior Ministry of Belarus, and they got access to the passport database. So now Cyber Partisans have access and own personal details, passport information of every Belarusian citizen. It's a lot of responsibility, because basically I will describe other hacks and what it meant and what type of data Cyber Partisans now have. But of course, even with the passport database, the group realized, and we're very lucky to have very rational, very responsible people as founders. I would say it's just luck that it happened so, because they definitely understand the responsibility that they have now, because the level of data they have is the level of the government. And it's now our responsibility to protect it, to make sure that none other nations get access to it. Not only Russians, for example, the enemy nation, the enemy regime, but others as well, friendly governments, like obviously that we are in touch with. I'm talking even about like Ukrainians, because that's something that is crucial, is super important. Not every Belarusian citizen is a regime supporter. Obviously, the majority is like a very small percentage that supports the regime, that works for a regime, that conducts some actions against the Belarusian nation. The majority of people are not part of it. Even if they vocally support Lukashenko, their actions, they don't do anything to against the nation, or they don't commit any crimes. So it's crucial, it's very important to protect this data, and we do everything possible, even sometimes spending our own financial resources, in order to provide data with good security, to pay for servers, do it efficiently, and protect it very well. Among other hacks and databases that Cyber Partisans get access to, I probably should mention the police database. It's about the work history of every police officer, that also enabled them to have access to the cameras. And that's something that we also published and shared with the Belarusian audience. We also had access to some of the personal information of these police officers. That also was important to share, because we stated originally that those who help the regime to conduct the repressions, then be prepared that your personal information will be out there. Of course, important part was revealing information about the State Security Committee, the KGB. We revealed information about military assets. And an important part of the work that helped a lot in the future investigation projects was the data about entries and exits into and from Belarus over the past 15 years. And it includes not only Belarusian citizens, but any other citizen, which, as an example, helped us to reveal some of the agents that were recruited by the Russian FSB. And these agents were Ukrainians. So after the beginning of the full-scale war, we partnered with Christo Grozev from Bellingcat, who did this type of work. He knew some of the FSB agents. We helped him to find those in this entries exits database. We also checked, who else was coming at around the same dates, who stayed in the same hotels as these Russian FSB agents. from Ukraine, because Belarus is an easy place to meet. It's a kind of neutral place to meet from Russia and Ukraine, even before the start of the beginning, obviously before the beginning of the full-scale war. And that's how we managed to expose those who were recruited by the Russian FSB agents. One of the most famous attacks, of course, are the ones I mentioned here, but the most notorious one is probably the attack on the Belarusian railway systems, and it happened after the beginning of the full-scale war. I will talk about this a little bit more later, so I'm not going to focus on it right now as much. The same goes for the attack on the General Radio Frequency Center. You might not be familiar with the name of this center as much, but the subdivision of it is Roskomnadzor, and it's probably might be more familiar for you. It's the censorship center of Russia. And about this attack and the consequences of this attack, I will also talk more a little later. And another attack that was very notorious also is is attack on Grodno manufacturer. It's #1 nitrogen manufacturer pretty much in the world before the sanctions were imposed, especially. And it was a very difficult, very complex attack that was important in a sense to show how the regime is not efficient about protecting a very important infrastructure type of companies and manufacturers inside Belarus. And last but not least on this slide, the attack on KGB website was also made a very big news. And again, I will talk about more how that attack affected the narratives and our outreach and our messages to the Belarusian regime and to, in general, the Belarusian audience. Before we go into the narratives against the Russian and Belarusian regimes, I would like to talk a little bit about how the group in general changes the narratives of the hacktivist movements, because we are not, and I'm not the professional or professional researcher on other hacktivist groups. Of course, I've heard about and read about anonymous groups and AT army in Ukraine, but even from this information that we know, or I know from those who reach out to us and ask questions, I could already tell how different cyber partisans are from other hacktivist groups. And why is that? Well, first of all, it's a very centralized movement. A lot of hacktivism groups are very decentralized, and sometimes it's hard to control, what other part of the group is doing while, the other is maybe supporting some other cause, and this cause may be very, very different from each other. It doesn't happen with cyber partisans. And what is the interesting point for me to say is that you could follow the group since 2020, and you can see the way how it's been developed, and you can see the messages, you can see what we publish and what's our goals and things like that, not just within 1, 2, 3 months. It's been already 4 years. And the group has been very consistent in what we're doing. Of course, anything can happen, but so far there were no major leaks, no major challenges, no confusing messages in the official channels of the group. And that's something that is very important and distinguishes the group from other hacktivist movements. It's also not hacktivism sometimes I would say is a little bit narrow description for the group. We did like the kind of the name or the description that some of the researchers gave to us. It's the digital resistance movement, because it is indeed larger than just hacktivism activities. It is a movement, and it is a resistance movement. It's not only, which resistance movements obviously happen mostly on the ground, but we work in the web domain. We do partner also with many political, civil society, and even military entities. and they definitely affect our messages. On the right side, you can see the screenshot from the official website that we have. Later on in the presentation, I will give you all the links where you can check out the work of the group. We do translate it into English. So we also try to publish interviews with our members, and they're all anonymous. I'm the only, as was mentioned before, I'm the only public speaker from the group, but we do want to share what other members think. Even though we don't provide their names, we still show sometimes different point of views on like some of the events that are happening, but also trying to do it differently a little bit from other hacktivism groups, because we want people to be familiar with the members. Especially, it's very important for Belarusians. They love cyber partisans, but we also want to show that it's not some, I don't know, crazy activists that work 24/7. They're also people. They're regular people, and it's very important to hear messages from them, what they dream about, what problems they have, what sad moments they have. So to make it closer to Belarusians, and to be, I would also even say, like, asking them to join, like, we can do it, you can also do it. You can at least follow, you can do something in order to change the situation. And sharing these interviews, I feel like, make it closer to the people and inspire them to be more proactive, even if it means just install VPN for your granny so she can follow the news. So even that is a great achievement for us. And then we also respond to the messages that the regime is doing, and sometimes they try to attack us. For example, the head of the KGB, Turtle, once said that they think that cyber partisans will attack the nuclear power plant and other related facilities. And we right away managed to respond, like, it's never been a goal for us. We stated even before. We many times show how the government, the regime doesn't protect infrastructure, doesn't protect very important factories, such as nuclear power plant, and how it can actually poses a very big threat to Belarusians. That's a very important message, and that's how we also challenge the narrative that the regime sometimes poses, like, hey, we're in control, and then if something bad happens, probably, that's cyber partisans that they're doing. And our counter message is, no, we actually do all of our attacks very responsibly. And you can see it within these 4 years that we've been operating. On the contrary, we're in a sense helping the regime by showing the weaknesses that they have. And as I showed in the previous slide, the attack on the nitrogen factory showed that this company is not very good in the security services. Cyber partisans had access to some of the machinery, and if they stopped that machinery, the factory could have blown up, because it's a nitrogen, it's a chemical plant. And then, like, we knew we could do it, but of course we would never do that. And we published the proof, and we even warned the regime, do something about that. Because if it's not us, but some other actors, Russian actors, Chinese actors, you name it, they will not consider the effect on regular people, because we are fighting for our own people. We are Belarusians. So of course, we do everything possible not to harm regular citizens, but it's not going to be the moral decision for other groups that want to create some operation that, I don't know, would, for example, involve Belarus in this Russian war, or something else to disrupt the situation. And this is something we constantly warn Belarusians, and we constantly even warn the regime, so they understand that the stakes can be really high if they don't start take care of this key infrastructure and key plants in Belarus. So for us, it's very important to challenge the regime's narratives, of course, because we're fighting for the hearts and minds of Belarusians. Without them, there is no way we can change the situation in Belarus. So with this attack that I mentioned before, what's important? It's important to show that the regime is weak, that the regime is not in the control of the situation. We expose a lot of crimes that the regime people are conducting. What's also, I think, very distinguished and very different from other groups operating in Belarus or Belarusian groups operating outside of Belarus, but of course working still for the Belarusian audience, is that very often they have proactive narratives, meaning they respond to something Lukashenko said, or Territorial said, or someone else said. We, of course, do the same. In the example, as I just showed you with the head of KGB. But we also create very proactive narratives, meaning we do something that the regime does not anticipate or they haven't even spoken about, and they have find excuses or explain themselves when we provide some messages or we expose something or we do the attack. I will talk a little bit about it in the later slides with examples from Lukashenko's statements, but that's something that is very important for us, and I wanted to mention it here. We also help to separate the regime and the Belarusian nation, and again, later I will explain to you how crucial it is and how important it is, especially after the war started. And then we do reveal agents operating abroad, and that puts a lot of pressure on anyone who wants to collaborate with the regime, including foreign agents, including those living abroad, including the Western countries. That what we were very surprised to learn, that want to collaborate with the regime. There are, different types of people all over the world. So let's discuss here now more about what Lukashenko says and how we challenge what he says, or as I mentioned before, how he has to explain himself. He constantly tries to repeat that he's in the control of the situation, that the government is in the control of the situation. That is so important for him, and he brings stability to Belarus. With all of the activity the cyber partisan is conducting, including the attack on Grodno Azot, this nitrogen factory, number one of the biggest ones in Europe at least, and top 3 in the world, is showed that he's not under control, and more than that, they don't care about protecting regular citizens. The situation on many factories, in many companies, state-run companies, on the railways, infrastructure is in a bad shape. They fired many IT specialists after 2020 because they want to have loyal people rather than professional people. So that exposed a lot of vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the regime, in the state. That's also this mindset of the way it was done during the Soviet Union. So they don't use the best practices. They not often use the modern technologies, and that's something we also show and say, this is the threat for Belarusians. You can see actually in this slide on the left side the attack on Grodno Azot, and how it looked for us. The group even got access to the cameras, and this usually how we work, and we show the proofs of what the attacks we conducted. Lukashenko also likes to say, and he said it several times, that he believes that cyber weapons are more dangerous than the nuclear weapons. So this is the proof for us. And he started saying it, of course, after the attacks from cyber partisans, I would say after 2021, when cyber partisans got access to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And it's a really big thing. So because he literally confirms that he believes cyber attacks are so dangerous for him, are so dangerous for the regime, and he's truly afraid of it. He constantly raises it on the meetings he has with his people, stating, if you don't stop, if you don't start doing something about this, I will make you, use your pen and paper like old school. You're not going to be allowed to use any computers. Of course, it's impossible, but that's what he says. I will bring you to these times before even the computers. And that's the level of, the development of the regime we can see from just these words. There are also cases when he had to explain himself, and I think this is very crucial for us when we do some proactive actions. We spread proactive narratives, and then Lukashenko and the regime have to explain. Usually they attack opposition or they attack regular people, and then we have to debunk what he says, or we have to explain to people what it means and things like that. But with the cyber partisans, they sometimes the first one to act, to spread the message, and then the regime responds to it. For example, cyber partisans revealed the information about COVID, about the vaccines. Together with journalists, we conducted an investigation where we exposed the wide-trapped conversations. The wide-trapped conversations, actually, I didn't mention it before, I'll say now. They came from the Ministry of Internal Affairs systems, because the police officers would record different conversations, and they would install these listening devices, not even for regular citizens or opposition, someone like that. He would actually listen to their own people, to the regime people. And for that reason, we would even have these wide-trap conversations between different police officer, but also between high-level doctors, those who have access to Lukashenko and those around him. So in that conversation, they were discussing how in the moment when people didn't have access to vaccines, Lukashenko was ordering European Western vaccines for him and his family. And then after that, he would have publicly say, it's not like that, I didn't do it. And the COVID situation and vaccine topic is very big for him, because as I will show you now, the COVID situation really affected the protests of 2020. He famously would say that what can sauna can fight COVID virus, and people would get really worried about the situation. And one of the reasons they would go out to the streets, because they realized he doesn't care about people. He doesn't care, what if people are dying. He would also say that only fat and old people die from COVID, and if you're healthy, you'll be fine. So it's like disregarded the problem of regular people who didn't have access to vaccines, who didn't have access to hospitals. And they would also lie about how many people would die. And that's something we also exposed together with the current times. And here in the slide, you can see that we found the excess mortality that we counted for COVID-19, which 17 times bigger than the authorities reported at that time. We also like to spread our message in different state-run websites, and that creates, of course, a lot of attention. Even if the site goes down, it of course happens pretty quickly. When you hack the website and post something, and usually it happens simultaneously with the hack of internal systems, but sometimes we just want to have fun with just the websites and we state it. One thing that it does, it definitely lifts the mood for people. In Belarus, it's especially those who are still actively support the democratic movement, or those who still want to do something actively. Obviously, many haven't forgotten, haven't forgiven, but they're too afraid to do things. And it's completely fine. It's completely understandable. But there are those that, of course, still active and they try to share information or do something. So it does cheer up people in Belarus, especially reading about the news of what's happening and how regime is successful in repressing people. We should, definitely acknowledge that. that's something that we found, and we receive a lot of feedback when people see this news. We hacked again to some website, posted some information, images, white, red, white flag that lifts people's moods for sure. But it also, sends the message for those who are still working for the regime. They see these messages. They understand that the fight is not over, and they should understand that they will be accountable for any crimes they conduct against the people. So that's something here. That's something that we do very actively. And here in this slide, you can see the messages we are posting on different state-run websites and newspapers, like in other regions, or the sports website that is, of course, very popular even among those who don't support Lukashenko, but they still would read the news from the state-run news media outlets. But an important also part, as I previously discussed, I'm not going to spend maybe a lot of time here, is that we do, with our messages, try to demoralize security services personnel. In the beginning of our more active public outreach, we would post wide-trap conversations between police officers that reveal information about how they would beat up brutally protesters. We publish information where they live or where their security objects are. But we realized that actually it doesn't demoralize them if we say how cruel they are, we show how brutally they beat up people. They're actually proud of it, and they're not hiding it. You can see it in the conversations. Of course, this message is important for regular Belarusians who now realize, what the faces are of those who conduct these repressions, because obviously Lukashenko might send the signal or that give these direct orders. And you can see in this screenshot on the bottom left how he did that. And it's important to create cases against him for different type of organizations that work on this now. But it didn't affect as much the police officers. What did affect is when we publish personal information about them. We have a series of cartoons that we created based also on these wide-trap conversations of some of the officers that would have alcohol problems, that cheat, do some, things like that. And of course, we only do it for those that we're for sure that work for the regime and conduct activities against Belarusians, because there are still some people that, even though they stayed inside the regime, they don't commit crimes. They wait for the moment when they can join. And of course, it's better to have Belarusians rather, for example, than Russian agents operating in Belarus. But then publishing this personal information definitely helps to put pressure on those who still working there. We, of course, show their faces. We show, what they think, what they believe in. And that's something that sends an important message to the Belarusian audience. And even those who want to collaborate, as I previously said, this is an important pressure for those who still have an illusion, or not even illusion. They just want money, because some of the agents would work for just some of the resources that the regime can give to them. And when we revealed information about those people who would write to the KGB, and we hacked the website of KGB and then published information of those who would send any type of request there. And here in the site, you can see that there were foreigners, they're obviously by Belarusians, but also there are some foreigners from Czech Republic, Netherlands, Germany, Ukraine, those who were saying, we want to work for KGB, contact me. And that's something that we also show for those. This is our message to those people who still want to work and who don't care about the morality of these actions. Because, of course, many actions of ours, many messages of ours try to appeal to the morality of working for someone like Lukashenko, like Lukashenko's regime. But for those that the morality aspect of the messaging doesn't work, we show them that, you cannot hide. You do this, your information will be revealed. So that helps to, frighten them in a sense that you work with the evil, you will be known. And that's the question, do you want your information to be published? Because Lukashenko cannot protect information of his own people. He cannot protect information, obviously, about the general citizens, but he also cannot protect information of those who are loyal to him or wants to be loyal to him or wants to be working for him and his regime. So this is something that we believe also very important in our work. So now is, of course, important moment to discuss the Russian full-scale war and how it affected our operations. So before February of 2022, we did work a lot on Belarus, but that shifted later on onto Russia and Russian regimes. So that gave us, of course, the understanding of, it's not only important to do something about the Belarusian regime, but also the Russian regime. At the very beginning of the full-scale war, the Belarusian regime was either silent or, as you can see, the Ministry of Defense would lie and say that to Ukrainian counterparts to say that they would not allow the invasion of Ukraine from the Belarusian territory. And of course, it was all lies. And even before the beginning in February, we saw the presence of Russian military forces in Belarus, even in January. And that's something that we decided we have to put people's attention on this. We have to expose those Russian troops that stayed in Belarus even before the war started. It was in January of 2022, basically a month a little bit more before the war started. We hacked the cyber partisans hacked the railways, Belarusian railways, trying to slow down the movement of Russian military trains. At that time, they had access to the very important automatic control systems, but they decided not to do anything about that because they didn't have enough specialists and they didn't want to endanger regular people. So what they did, they affected the freight trains, commercial trains, tried to slow down the movement of them in order to maybe affect the movement of military trains from Russia. To be honest with you, we don't know the level of success from this first public attack, but it was definitely important to show this message, to try to influence the presence of Russian military troops and to say, hey, Belarusians are not okay with this presence. We are against the war. That's the big red flag for us. It didn't serve the purpose of stopping the attack from Belarusian territory, unfortunately, but it definitely taught us a lesson, what we can do, and it also encouraged people to reach out to us. So the former workers of the railway station then reached out to us and explained how these, automatic control systems work. And it was very important because, to turn it off randomly, abruptly, it would definitely affect, might create very dangerous situation because these automatic systems are responsible for the directions of the train and for the semaphores showing, green, red lights and stuff like that, and they're off randomly, then the trains can collapse and things like that, which we definitely didn't want to, but we realized how to do it in a safely way. And that's definitely, affected the movement in the end of the Russian military trains for at least 2 weeks, which was very, very important for us. And was crucial to slow down because without the logistics, of course, the attack cannot be as successful. Of course, it's Ukrainians and those who are fighting in Ukraine truly stop the attack on Kiev, but we also hope that even if it's 1%, we saved one life because of the effect on the movement of the Russian trains. We are very happy, and that was definitely the goal. And here you can see that we tried to send different type of messages. In the first message from our official Twitter account, we show how this ammunition is dangerous for even the workers, because after the sabotage, they couldn't use properly the Russian military trains, the proper trains, so they started using the ordinary freight trains in order to transport ammunition. It wasn't as successful, it definitely wasn't as fast as the regular trains, but it still allowed to transport different hazard equipment. And that's something that we were trying to explain to regular workers, like it's not safe. Because the regular railways are not created for these specific military trains and specific military and hazardous equipment. So it definitely endangers those Belarusians working on the railways. We also sent the second message. You see, the second important message that you can see in the second screenshot is, and it is about the technology they're using in the railways. And it's something that connects to the message I already discussed with you, is that we try to show how the regime is ineffective and how he poses threats to the infrastructure, how it's very badly managed and maintained. And, that's another part of some of the messaging that the group provides, is in a little bit, down-to-earth, funny way how we send the messages. Like, that the railways network is run on the piece of crapware. It's Windows XP, it's cave times in 21st century. And it does show, you run things on Windows XP. There might be much bigger and worse situation if it's not us who hack it, because cyber partisans hack and conduct these operations for months. They sit there, they learn the internal documentation because they don't want to create any dangerous situations. If it's not us and someone else, who knows what can happen? And that's something that we repeat constantly, and we show the proof, as here you can see, it's run on Windows XP. What is also smart about this screenshot, I don't know how many of you can understand Russian, but in this screenshot you can see Moscow. It says Moskva, Moscow in this picture, and it is the message for Russians. It is the message that, you can see that the Belarusian network is integrated into the Russian railways network. And if we really, really want, we can go inside and affect it. And we know that the Russian FSB watching us. Even before the attack on the Belarusian railways, they were definitely watching us, and they definitely did get scared. That we think potentially might be one of the reasons why the movement of the Russian military train stopped in that specific time slot, because they were really afraid that we could get into the Russian railways. And in the third screenshot, you can see how we try to create some disruption and publish also information about the conversations that were wire-trapped in the Russian embassy in Belarus. Lukashenko, and here we also say in the message, loves to say how Russian, Belarusian nations are brotherly nations. But, it does turn out that it's not so brotherly sometimes, especially when they wire-trap the conversations in the embassies, and that's we don't always know what type of disruption we create with this type of messages, and how internally it's being interpreted, but definitely it adds up to our attempts to create this disruption and to create some distrust between the Russian regime and Belarusian regime that we know already exists. And another important topic I want to discuss about the narratives is that it's easy, in a sense, of course, it's relatively easy to fight the authoritarian regimes, Belarusian and Russian. But what about Ukrainians? What about our friends? Because after, of course, the beginning of the full-scale war, and after the attack started in Belarus onto Kiev, and the rockets flying from the Belarusian territory, Ukrainians, of course, had a negative attitude. And they had negative attitude not for the regime that was responsible for this, but for the regular people, which is completely understandable because, you've been killed, you've been raped, all these horrible stories in Bucha and the Russian soldiers that came from the Belarusian territory, all the Russian rockets that fly from the Belarusian territories and killing people. You cannot be rational when you hear this news, when you have this experience. You will hate and have negative attitudes, of course, for regular people as well. And what we believed is our mission is to spread the message that, hey, we are fighting, we try to help you. Belarus is occupied by the regime, in a sense, by the Russian regime. It's impossible to collect the rockets with bare hands. We don't have weapons like you guys have. We don't have guns. We don't have anything to protect ourselves from the police force brutality, but from the Russian military men as well. But we have other ways to fight, like cyber partisans. We fight, in the web web world, and whatever information we can get, we provide to our Ukrainian friends. We work with the Ukrainian security services. We also partnered with Kostuy-Kalinovsky Regiment. It's the Belarusian regiment fighting in Ukraine. And we also would spread information about this on different sources, on different websites, in Russian networks as well. And of course, we would talk about it whenever we have a chance, when we connect with Ukrainian media, when we connect with Ukrainian organizations, and we try to stress all the time that we always assumed Putin, Kremlin, and the imperial regime is our enemy. We know that he supports Lukashenko. And, we never had doubts, who occupied Crimea. We never had this messages that try to appeal to, we still have in Belarus some neutral audience who not so sure about Russia. They listen to propaganda, and Russian propaganda becoming very influential in Belarus, and Belarusian propaganda becoming much more efficient than it was before in 2020. They definitely learned their lesson, and it's something that also important to acknowledge. So that's something that became crucial for us to publish these messages, to talk and advertise, maybe not the best word, but you know what I mean, talk about what's the Kostuy-Kalinovsky regiment doing and what we're doing also together, how we also help this regiment, because as Belarusians now fighting in Ukraine, they're dying in Ukraine. Up to 20 Belarusians died already since the war started. And it's very important for us to show, we have a small country. We never attacked you. Yes, the territory was allowed to be used by the regime, not by Belarusians, by the regime. But still, many people came to Ukraine and they're helping Ukraine, and we are helping also as much as possible. And now, in the end, more to the end of the presentation, I know we're, I think, going a little bit over, so apologies for this. I hope we will have enough time for all of your questions. But I think it's also very important to discuss the hack and the work that we did against the Russian entities. And the most famous, and I think one of the only ones known in public, is the attack on Roskomnadzor. Roskomnadzor is a part of the General Frequency Center that I mentioned previously. But just for the ease of the explanation and the conversation, I will be just talking about as if we only attacked Roskomnadzor, but the attack was much broader and it included other entities, but Roskomnadzor was the major one of them. The attack happened in November of 2022, so after the full-scale war started. It had so much information, 2 terabytes of data that the group managed to obtain from Roskomnadzor. And with this help of this data, we managed to prove, of course, not only us, we did our own investigations, but we shared this information with many journalists, and then they joined the work in exposing this type of surveillance as well. What was, I think, important in our decision is we, of course, verified all of our journalists that reached out, Russian journalists, and you always can be a little bit suspicious of, and that was my job, to verify those and make sure that they're not working in Russia, that they're not anyhow connected with the Russian FSB or other entities. So we also ask them, don't publish any investigations until around, I think we gave everyone 2 months. So then they had this kind of ban from publishing for some time, and then everyone published the information on the same day, pretty much. Of course, they had materials coming after, but it was like exploding bomb on the day when all of these investigations went out. It was very interesting to see, and that definitely had an influence on Roskomnadzor, because from any angles, from many media outlets, all this investigations and all this information came out. Roskomnadzor would officially say all the time, whenever someone would reach out for comments, that the situation was manageable, that it was just DDoS attack, and then no one saw the classified information and had access to critical infrastructure. And we, in return, managed to prove that it's not true. We made jokes about it. We published even the chats of workers that you can find, saying, they're discussing it as a big catastrophe. They're very discouraged. They're really afraid that the cyber partisans get access to their personal computers and personal information, because of course many of them would connect to their work computer stations from their personal computers during COVID, after COVID. So yes, cyber partisans had access to personal information, which created some internal problems, because they would reach out to their managers complaining like, hey, what if they have access to my bank accounts? They were really, not feeling comfortable at what's happening, and how their own managers, the Roskomnadzor or the government workers, did not protect their information. So it also revealed a lot of information, these investigations, and the information we provided about how Russia bans and blocks information about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They deleted around 150,000 publications, and that's something that was provable. They remove any mentions about the information in general, even in the search engines. They work with different type of technologies that we also managed to show, like including some AI tools that search and manually adjust results that you can see in the screen. How Russia bombs residential buildings and so on. The Roskomnadzor also analyzes social networks, and they did try to identify some fake news that they call fake. Obviously, that's real news, and they also try to block them. They very heavily follow and monitor any publications in the Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. In addition, they of course follow everything that is happening in Belarus, Kazakhstan, these countries that they believe that fall under their influence of interest. And again, of course, the number one priority is Ukrainian, Russian-speaking media, the territories that got occupied by Russia. And they do work a lot in order to block the websites there, the radio channels. As you can see, the numbers are really big. So this is, they don't conduct their activities only on the ground. It's not only military war, it's also the war to try to change the mindset, to try to change the culture, as they were successfully doing throughout the whole history, because it's an imperial power. And that's what they're doing now. And it's happening in front of our eyes. And it's, in a sense, became our goal now, the group's goal, to expose this and to show what's happening, how they're doing, and to help even Russian civil societies to try to work with that, and having like counter activities, counter messages to what Russian authorities are doing. I think I would like to switch to the next slide. And okay, now it's working. The last thing that I would mention is that it's a very important part of the work of cyber partisans, as I was discussing at the very beginning, that You can't challenge all of these narratives if people don't see them. If they don't have the tools, if they don't feel safe using applications like Telegram, they're not going to see it. They're not going to be able to, be connected to Russian opposition, Belarusian democratic forces. So for that reason, we work a lot on the educational materials and different type of application. In the right side of this slide, you can see the Partisan messaging app, where you can create different versions of the messages you can send, and those mobile operators will not be able to decrypt the message. And this app works even without the internet, and we highly recommend using it, whenever there are any type of protests or situations like that. And I guess one of the most important and popular applications that we created is the Partisan Telegram. It's a modification of the regular Telegram, which again is very popular in Eastern Europe. And one of the major features in this app is that we created a fake passcode mode. That's when when you're detained, either by Belarusian police forces or Russian military forces on occupied territories, when they ask the passcode for your Telegram, you gave them the fake one. And if you enter this fake passcode, the information that you marked previously will be erased. The chats will be deleted that you marked, the groups will be unfollowed, the channels will be unfollowed, because it's really hard to constantly remove this type of information. And you want to stay in touch. And then from the feedback we hear, people want to share information. On occupied territories, it's the question of not just, whether you're going to be detained, it's the question of life and death. So if they help the Ukrainian military forces by sharing the location of Russian troops, and they cannot, as a human being, you cannot always be aware or be always, deleting this type of information. But if you previously marked these chats and we have this feedback, it saves lives. It actually saves lives, and we try to spread the information about this app as much as possible, because, people get detained, they show the phone, they show the Telegram, and these very important messages or channels are not visible in this application. So that's something that we believe is very important to continue our work, and we do work on some additional features that are coming out soon. And this pretty much it from me. This is the social media where you can read more about our work. Please follow, please read. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Thank you so much for your input, and thank you so much for sharing these fascinating insights into the Belarusian cyber partisans. Well, there are actually a lot of questions I want to ask. We only have 15 minutes left, sadly, but that's totally fine. I will pack them as briefly as I can. Maybe let's start with the most common question, I guess, that you get asked. You call yourself hacktivists, and the thing you're doing is ethical hacking. In what way would you prescribe your methods are ethical? And for example, you mentioned that you collected passport data from I guess more or less every person in Belarus, even Lukashenko himself. How do you handle this kind of information, like without any doubt? And for example, where do you share your information as well? Like, for example, any media and any media collaborations or likewise?
It's a very good question, and we get asked quite often, and I think also in the chats that I think some people also, ask if it's justifiable to reveal the personal information. We have our code of conduct, first of all. So we have a set of rules that any new member have to follow. Of course, we cannot impose these rules on anyone. These people are anonymous. We don't have any means to control or, punish like you have. This means in a regular society, you can put people in prison, legally. Of course, if they are going against any set of rules set up in the law, we don't have this type of means. So we have to rely on rationality of people. And so far it's been well maintained. We also don't give any sensitive access to just newcomers, even people who are in the group for a year. It's like a big loop of what they need to do in order to become even the member, and not even discussing about some special accesses. Another aspect that is important is that I even discussed it with the Western lawyers. I was asking them, hey, do you consider it as a crime? And the answer, even surprisingly for me in a sense, was like, no, as long as you're fighting against the Belarusian regime, and obviously the guy is dictator. Of course, if you're fighting against Russia, who launched this full-scale war, as long as you don't cross this line of like attacking, I don't know, Western entities, you're fine, you're doing your type of activities, and it's justified. It is a gray zone. Some would say, it's a gray zone, we need to go deeply, what type of information, can you prove that it's only those who connected to the regime? But no one so far labeled us from the Western world like a terrorist or anything like that, especially after the full-scale war. We did receive some criticism even from the academia before, saying like, oh, what if they do something that will make Russian hackers attack the West? And guess what? They don't care about what you do. They do whatever they want, and they will find excuse no matter what. As we see now, and we're very glad that now the Western world sees it, Russians don't need the reason. They will always find the excuse what they're doing. So this is something that made our work definitely easier from this moral perspective. That's, I guess, pretty much it. If you want to maybe clarify, and I again saw some questions in the chat, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, that's perfect. No, thank you so much for answering that. Actually, talking about terrorist affairs that Western sides wouldn't tell you're doing. Actually, in Belarus, you are considered a terrorist organization. And for these, the listeners that don't know this, if you, for example, donate or just do any work, like voluntary work for a terrorist organization, you can get up to 12 years imprisonment in Belarus. Whereas, for example, there is extremist organizations as well, where donations, for example, are being punished by, I think, 5 years minimum. And that's just it. And I think that leads me to my next question, like authoritarian regimes often, or well, let's say like that, actually, most of the times, pretty much always, try to discredit organizations like you, like the cyber partisans, labeling them as a threat, like foreign agents in Russia, or you as a terrorist organization. And my question would be, how has the Belarusian regime attempted to undermine you or discredit you in the past? Like you talked, for example, about Tertel, the head of the KGB. One comment to this, because someone asked in the Q&A, the KGB, whether that's still the name, like in Soviet Union.
That's still the name. Yep, that's still the name.
It is. Belarus didn't change the name, unlike Russia, for example, where it's called FSB these days. So yeah, how has the Belarusian regime attempted to just discredit you in the past, next to the comment made by Tertel, for example?
Sorry, what was the last part? So it is, well, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya also labeled as a terrorist. I personally also labeled as a terrorist, but that there are just many great people and groups are labeled. And again, as I stated before, it's so crucial and so important to explain to people the danger. If you want to support the group, if you follow, if you donate, and it's our responsibility to do so. We're one of the major groups that's saying like, hey, don't do if it's not safe for you. Just stay out of the prison. It's more important to stay, in safety than donate money to someone, not only to us. We will find resources, just, be safe. We don't encourage people, like we don't have any, means how people can support us via, Facebook donation page or PayPal, anything that might be even slightly dangerous. That's why we only have for people for donations, the Bitcoins, the cryptocurrencies that we believe. Again, we have instructions on our official website. We have long, lengthy instructions if people still want to support us, especially inside Belarus. They can do so. but we always say, and encourage in our posts, even we say, hey, turn on VPN if you want to read this article. If you're in Belarus, we constantly remind this. We, again, rather have less people follow us, less people donating, then though these people can be detained in Belarus. So we do believe it's very important. And we're in constant touch with other Belarusian groups operating abroad. We try to remind them if we see that they posted some dangerous link for donations, for anything like that. We let them know. We're like, hey, you pose a risk for people in Belarus, and it's not okay. Please change it. Otherwise, we will expose you and write about it in our public post, telling everyone, that's the risk.
Yeah, that's actually something, another point I've heard. Well, one aspect that what you're doing is basically proactively trying to change authoritarian narratives. So narratives given by the state, like for example, the COVID narrative that you can just, well, get rid of it by sauna and vodka. You are changing, like proactively changing these. To my understanding, what differentiates you from, for example, other hackers, you have a goal, you have a target, and you target this specific target, if I'm not mistaken. So you are proactively trying to collect data that reveals the disinformation published and transmitted by the state.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's important not just to reveal disinformation, because we don't think that just publishing the disinformation will change the situation in Belarus. It's definitely more complex, and that's why we have different types of activities, not only debunking disinformation, but sometimes attacking the regime and make them expose their vulnerabilities, excuse themselves, but also even if they start protecting their systems better, even if it makes harder our job, it's still better than, trying to endanger the general population.
Actually, to reveal the issues, the problems that the regime is dealing with. You talked about the Windows XP version that they were using at the Belarusian railways. Someone asked in the Q&A, since the Belarusian railway network only uses Windows XP, is there any more sophisticated software used by the Belarusian regime, like, for example, Windows 7, 10, or 11? Because, to reveal that they're still operating on such an outdated version that is, a way of discrediting the regime as well, like showing that they don't have the availabilities, the capabilities to switch to new versions, maybe even like they cannot finance it.
Yeah, they cannot, and some of the networks entities, they're sanctioned, so they're cannot officially use it, or sometimes they don't have money. If you can believe it, they do use the versions that they download from other not official websites. So they're using non-official versions, which of course poses a huge risk because sometimes it contains viruses. In some places, and I said not only Windows XP is on the rail networks, there are other computers or other departments that might use the later version of Windows, but other companies definitely have better systems. The more important the entity is, especially for the internal work of the regime, meaning the security services, the more sophisticated cybersecurity practices we can notice, including the software. And they do still use the Western software. Even if the entity was sanctioned, we do notice that they still manage to buy the software, the official software also, by setting up fake companies in Europe, for example. And that's something we try also to raise and reach out to those who are in touch with the Western countries trying to impose sanctions or work on not, trying to stop the loopholes for the sanctions. So it's both. Definitely what we notice that the Belarusian systems are not as well protected as Russian. Russians have more professional cybersecurity specialists, IT specialists that work for the Russian regime, and they're better protected, but not as well. The group cannot operate there as well.
Super interesting. We actually have a lot of more questions. That's why I'm rushing a little. There are questions about whether there are any challenges that cyber partisans face in their activities, especially in terms of security and personal risk. And actually, another person asks as well, because you're the only person that's face is published. Well, it's publicly known. Does this cause any risk or harm to yourself, for example?
There is definitely risk. Yes, I do think about it, especially when I travel to, I don't know, Ukraine, Poland, especially Ukraine, because we know that the agent's been operating there. It is risky, but at the end of the day, you have to do what you have to do. And, thinking of how people are suffering in prisons, how people dying in Ukraine, I guess, helps to overcome the fears. I try to be as careful as possible from a physical perspective, from how I use my devices as well. I do think that they definitely much more interested in catching actual hackers, actual technical specialists that are doing it, not just me who's speaking on behalf of them. There is a hunt for our group members. We definitely know that. They're not being successful yet, but that's something that we're aware of, and it definitely poses the risk. Again, that's why we constantly develop our kind of security protocols. We revise them. And we know that the KGB agents try to infiltrate the group. They try to pretend that they, want to volunteer, want to help. For that reason, we have a very long process of accepting new members. And it's still risky. We still understand that even with all these practices and protocols, there is still a chance that someone can infiltrate the group. That's why there are different levels of accesses. Some person, we can give some of the type of work like test partisan telegram, even if it's a KGB agent, it's fine. They're not going to learn anything sensitive. So that is something that we realized will be, practical and realistic understanding that we cannot be perfect, but minimizing the risk as much as possible.
Absolutely, that's a perfect answer. I have one last question, and if we still have time, oh, no, we actually don't, but one last question because of the so-called elections next year on 26th of January 2025, the new so-called presidential elections will take place. And my questions, well, you mentioned that the sound of repression in Belarus continues even though after the harsh punishment followed the 2020 elections, which is absolutely true. You see this in the country itself, in the way they're sharing their narratives internationally, but also in the punishment of political prisoners and the persecution of political prisoners. But that beside, my question would be, given the regime's tight control over media, they, for example, want to start their own media platform, like their own Belarus YouTube, as I think Lukashenko shared in May this year.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah, like as a side comment, Belarus' own YouTube, where they can take control of it, they can moderate it, so nothing will be blocked because of disinformation by YouTube anymore. So, given the regime's tight control over media and public information, what kinds of tactics do you expect from them during the next so-called elections? What kind of narratives will be shared?
We don't think things like Belarusian YouTube channel will be ready for this election. It's just not possible for us, knowing the technical expertise that they have and people working for them that they have. It's more for laundering money, most likely, and that's why they did it, or announcing it or working on it. Definitely, it is hard to work against the narrative that the regime is posing. I think, again, you need to acknowledge when your enemy is successful. I think they're successful in promoting this narrative, if Lukashenko is in power, there will be no war, and people are afraid of war historically in Belarus. And he's saying, you don't want something like that, what Ukraine is experiencing, and especially with this not sometimes good news coming from the front lines, that Russia is moving forward and the devastations that they caused. So I think this narrative will be successful. I don't think it will make a big turnaround of people going and actually voting for Lukashenko. I think we will have a situation something similar to 2015, where it happened after the occupation of Crimea, 2014, when Belarusians also got scared of like, what if Russians can come and occupy Belarus? And then Lukashenko's like, hey, I'm your guarantee that it's not going to happen. You might not like me, but at least, I'm not going to let Russians come in. So I believe that might be successful. And I don't think that there is a point fighting against this narrative, in the sense that, yes, of course, we can continue talking about that. That Lukashenko in the first place allowed Russians to be on the territory. It's still important to explain this ties between the Lukashenko and Putin. But a lot also depends on what's going to happen in Ukraine. It is important to stay in touch still, but also realistically understand that the regional conflict affects the situation and affects the presidential elections. We prepare some surprises on our side, but I personally, it might not be the opinion of the whole group. I don't think that we should put so much stakes into these elections. It's so-called elections, it's rigged elections, it's not real. It's not democratic, and I don't think the situation will change in January, but it's something we still need to be prepared for the long-term strategy, and we need to be collaborative, and we need to realistically understand what's happening in Ukraine, if there are going to be some negotiations, and if they are, Belarusian democratic forces should participate in them. And this is even more important than the presidential election, though again, it's usually the election cycle is the moment where you can outreach a message, especially those who so afraid and not following for the last 5 years. So in that regard, we're still gonna send some messages. We're still gonna talk about what's happening and exposing what Lukashenko is doing and why he's the reason that Belarus in the situation that it currently is.
Thank you so much. You summarized that just perfectly. I can just agree. Our lecture has sadly already come to an end. I would have had so many more questions, but thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for your presentation. Following next week, actually an information for our students, next week we'll have a lecture together with Marina Rodiak to the topic of, that's going to be in German, narrative Allianzen und verborgene Divergenzen, die Rolle der Mediensprache in Chinas pro-russischer Neutralität. The lecture will be moderated by Wolfgang Beer, and I'm already looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having you tonight, Yuliana.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Mine too.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.